You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to the first off-season edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 283rd edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 928th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of March 22nd, 2023, one day early so that we don't conflict with Thursday's NCAA tournament games. I'm your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week, let's take a short break from our regularly scheduled IU navel-gazing to discuss the experiences that a couple of other fan bases are having, which I think add useful context to what Mike Woodson has already achieved at Indiana and how that success can sustain itself moving forward. First off, let's talk about the value of just making the tournament at all. After 5 straight seasons of being on the outside looking in, Indiana has now made 2 straight, even securing a protected seed this season. Now, you can dismiss that achievement of a number 4 seed as somehow being beneath preseason expectations for this team, preseason expectations that assumed a 5th-year All-Big Ten level point guard would be in the lineup all season, but I know you're smarter than that. Getting a 4 seed was significant. Unfortunately, Indiana ran into the particular type of team that this season taught us the Hoosiers couldn't handle, which led to a predictable result. And that sucks, and we need to learn from it. But you know what? That's the nature of a single elimination tournament. Matchups matter. Now consider the experience Tennessee is having, a program that missed the tournament 5 out of 6 seasons prior to 2018. Yet here they are, a 4 seed like Indiana, preparing for a Sweet 16 matchup in which they are favored against number 9 seed Florida Atlantic after dominating a favorable matchup against an overrated cherubic Duke team that had no answer for Tennessee's grown man toughness. The Vols have now made the tournament 5 out of the last 6 seasons and are poised for their deepest run under Rick Barnes. Keep making the tournament with good teams, and your chances of a run improves. Indiana has now taken the first 2 steps along that path, even if this particular tournament appearance didn't prove so favorable or fruitful. Secondly, consider the experience of Kansas State and Jerome Tang, my personal pick for National Coach of the Year. He took over a program that had missed 3 straight tournaments while finishing 61st, 147th, and 90th in KenPom. And in one season, Tang built a team that is number 21 in KenPom with a number 3 seed in the tournament preparing to face number 7 Michigan State in the Sweet 16. But how? They are a lowly 316th in minutes continuity from last season to this season. The answer, of course, is the transfer portal. If you have a good strategy and execute on it, you can rebuild a roster quickly, something Indiana fans will be very focused on this offseason with 4 starters, including a generational superstar moving on. And think about it. What built-in resources did Tang have at Kansas State that Indiana doesn't have? Certainly none that I know of. And Mike Woodson now has the player development stories of Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino to use in his sales pitch as well. So while there seems to be a particularly misguided line of conversation among some IU fans that views this season as a failure and next season as bleak, I would urge any of you afflicted with this brainworm to reassess the assumptions on which your doom and gloom attitudes are based. The last 2 seasons have been far from perfect. We've expressed our concerns regularly on the show. You know what they are. But the bottom line is that Mike Woodson has demonstrated an ability to get this program back to the tournament and back into the top half of the conference, which are really meaningful steps given the last 25 years this program has spent in the wilderness. And the new reality of roster building means Indiana is no sure thing to fall off a cliff next season. In fact, it seems more likely than not, given IU's built-in advantages, that we'll be able to pull in some difference-making transfers who can at least keep the positive momentum going in year 3, even if it doesn't end up being the quantum leap forward we'd all love to experience. Still, as far as Indiana felt away from a banner while getting hammered on Sunday night, the full body of Mike Woodson's work to date, which, by the way, includes the groundwork laid with high-level 2024 and 2025 prospects, plus the presence of the transfer portal, means IU probably isn't as far away from competing for another banner as some of the Chicken Littles would have you believe. Of course, you have to make up your own mind, but just know that there is plenty of evidence to suggest that optimism, or at a minimum patience, are perfectly reasonable mindsets to adopt while watching this offseason play out. All right, now let me introduce my co-host this week. To my left, he is a longtime high school basketball coach in the state of Indiana and the founder of Delphi Bracketology, and maybe now a Notre Dame fan?
He remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
Coach, it is Tonsoni time. What's on your mind tonight?
I am here to state that I am not transferring or putting my name into the podcast transfer portal. This is the only place to be, and I will stay there, despite my college roommate, who's now a big Notre Dame booster lawyer in South Bend, calling me immediately, and my best man in my wedding being a Notre Dame grad who now wants to come visit all of a sudden. I am not going to fall, to their offers. But, Dingus Day Grand Marshal for the parade is hard to pass up. It's a little bit more than you're offering, Jared. So I'm giving up a lot to stay here. No, just disappointing end for both the men's and the women's. And I will encourage everyone to go back and listen, to your banner moment and understand that, one game doesn't necessarily make a season a failure or an embarrassment or anything like that. It is frustrating. It is disappointing, devastating. There's a lot of words you can use to describe the feeling that we went through, but we are in a better place in both programs than ever before, and that cannot be denied. And yes, you mentioned there are always issues with a strategy here or offense or defensive philosophy or things like that. But we've been in the tournament and we've been on the bracket for 2 years in a row, which Indiana basketball has struggled on the men's side specifically to do that for a long time. And then you pose an interesting question about optimism versus the pessimist side, but patience. I think the key word for a lot of us is give Coach Woodson some time, see what he's going to do. We have no idea what the roster is going to be. We can guess. We're going to talk about it tonight, our wishes, all of that. But I think Coach Woodson has at least earned patience from the Indiana fan base to be patient and see how he does. It is a big year because you are losing Trace Jackson Davis and a good recruit that he brought in. And you must follow that up with good recruiting in the transfer portal because it steps backwards, which is the major concern for a lot of Indiana fans. They're nervous about just this being a 2-year blip. Granted, we all are, but patience and realize that this was a good run in an injury year, despite whatever differences we may have in style or recruiting. Indiana basketball is on its way back. And our goal and hope is that it just continues to take those steps, but only time will tell. And that's where I'm trying to convince myself to be at, and I think it's a healthy place for all of us fans to be as well.
Well said, Coach. All right, and also joining us tonight, we have a special guest. Look, if you're part of any private IU basketball communities like ours or Pigs or Discords or this or that, you have probably read posts by this guy and been like, damn, that's a smart basketball point. And that is why we are excited to have him on there. He has coached youth basketball for 24 years in the Columbus, Indiana area, most recently in the Columbus Revolution program. It is Coach Bob Moats. What's up, Coach? Glad to have you here.
Great to be here. Great to be here again. Love getting a chance to talk to you guys about basketball for an hour and just kind of going over, what we think is going to possibly happen next season. So
absolutely. Do you have any kind of overarching points now on kind of the team or the off season as we're a few days removed from the loss?
To put this in perspective, my first Indiana University game was IU Notre Dame 1993. And Coach Tonsoni probably remembers this game. Jared's thinking the same thing. That was the infamous kicking incident game. That was my first game as a freshman at IU sitting in Assembly Hall. So the last, call it 28, 29 years has been interesting as an IU fan, because when you're 18, it was every fall rolls around and Indiana University has a chance of being a national champion. And getting back to that point, and Coach is right, you got to be a little patient, and you got to kind of just let the process go through. And I feel like we're on the cusp of something great, to put, and since that time, since Calvert Cheney's graduation, this team's only been better than a 5 seed 4 times in the NCAA tournament. And when you really think about that, and you think about all the great players that have gone through, all the coaching changes, all of the stuff that's happened, in almost 30 years, only 4 times have you been better than that 5 seed. It's kind of telling to this program as to where we've been and where we need to go. And Mike Woodson did it in 2, and he did it with a good portion of guys that he inherited versus, going through the full. We've done the whole blow the thing up, rebuild it from the ground up, start from the ashes, let's renovate. So at this point, now we're going to kind of see that next step, which I think, Coach again kind of hit on, which is, okay, so let's see what this guy's really about. Let's see what he really wants to bring to Indiana. We get some hints as to who he's brought in the last couple of years. We look at who he's targeting, 24, 25. We're not really sure how he wants to play. We're not really sure. And he said it in his press conference, point blank, said, I've never run through the post. So you're getting this impression that here's a guy in his 60s who's learning kind of how to do this for the first time, as a coach, designing an offense around a concept that he's not really wanting to design around. And the result was 2 tournament appearances and a 4 seed. With the 4 seed, a second place in the Big Ten in his second year. And that's with significant minutes turnovers in many respects. So, let's let this play out a little bit.
And to be clear, to put kind of a bow on these opening statements, you can be patient, you can even be optimistic without lowering your standards.
Exactly.
It's just that I think some people have different levels of patience they're willing to give on the road back to the same place we all want to get to. So, excellent points, guys. All right, here's what we have in store this week. We got a lot of Hoosier headlines to go over, some transfer portal stuff. We're going to get to that. Then in segment 2, we're going to do a little off-season primer. What are reasonable expectations for this uncertain off-season? And then we got a bunch of good questions. So we will hit those in our mailbag. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor.
Home field apparel, wear one for the team.
Yes, this edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, like Doing the Work and Crimson Cast, is presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel. Well, they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you'll find anywhere, with beloved logos like 2 different versions of the Bison, so many more. They, last week released some incredible designs with the women's basketball team, and I know it's a bummer to not be able to order those and wear them while the team is still playing, but they're still great keepsakes for remembering a wonderful season that the women had. Coach wears something from Home Field Apparel literally every day. I think changes 4 times a day into different items from Home Field Apparel. But let me tell you all something. We may have to beware about Home Field Apparel, because it is possible that they're taking a heel turn, because several Indiana fans who signed up for the mystery boxes have reported getting Miami shirts this week. Now, was that intentional by Home Field Apparel? Is that just luck of the draw? Is this part of a long game to convince the rest of their audience that they're not so focused on Indiana? I don't know. But it's an interesting development. I think we know Home Field Apparel enough to trust them. But let's just keep your eye on that. Just keep your eye on that a little bit. No, I can't wait to get my second shipment in already, because I am part of that. And here's the thing. No matter what you buy, it will be comfortable. The colors will last through many washings. And you're supporting an Indiana-based company that came up through Kelly. What could be better than that? So go to homefieldapparel.com. Use our promo code HOME to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME for 15% off. Again, the website, homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. Okay, guys, let's hop into Hoosier headlines here. The big one right off the bat, Trace Jackson Davis, one of 4 finalists for the Naismith Player of the Year Award, along with Zach Edey, Jalen Wilson, and Timmy? Is Timmy the other one? I think Timmy's the other one. So there's those 4. Terry Morin is a finalist for Coach of the Year. And the fan vote matters. I think the fan vote actually accounts for 5% of the vote, and you can vote once every day. So go to naismithfanvote.com. I know a lot of people have said, okay, I'll vote for the Indiana people, but I don't know who to vote in the other ones. If you want my default choices, it's Jerome Tang and Aaliyah Boston from South Carolina, Player of the Year for the women. Jerome Tang, Coach of the Year. That's I was coaching someone on that earlier, and they liked having the other choices made for them. So if you want to use those, feel free. Do you guys have any different choices? I know you're probably going to vote for Trace and for Terry Morin, but do you have any other choices for the other ones, Coach T?
I tell you what, Tang at Kansas State has been a fascinating story. So I'm with you there, and I'm not as vested in the women's game other than Indiana basketball. But I know the young lady that you mentioned is good as well. So I will just back up your choices and vote for the IU people. There's nothing wrong with that. We love them, we appreciate them, and fill that voting up with our votes.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, Mackenzie Holmes wasn't one of the four. Or obviously, I would have been saying vote for her, but she was not in there. Should have been. I think we all agree, but she was not there. Guys, there is only one Big Ten team in the Sweet 16, and that is Michigan State. I don't want to get into a long discussion about it because it's one of those things that can be an entire topic, and I feel like we've talked it to death every offseason. I'm just curious, Bob, if you have any kind of quick takes on the Big Ten's performance in the tournament this year.
It was, again, I think across the board in college basketball, we saw a lot of people just in the middle, a lot of swapping back and forth. And I was doing coaches' top 25 poll every day, every week. I mean, I felt like times I had to get a dartboard out and throw darts to figure out, 15 through 25 or sometimes 10 through 25, because you just had a lot of, just a pile almost at times of what would be considered average. I was always a big fan of Marquette. I was kind of surprised to see them go down the way that they did, but it's a one-day tournament or one game out. And so when you get a one game out situation like that, it's just, have a rough shooting night or, drop early and you have to scratch back into it. As for the rest of the conference, I think it pretty much went as expected. The thing was, we saw some of those lower seed teams like Penn State and Northwestern compete at a very high level. So that's promising, but it's Purdue was bizarre to say the least. You kind of look at it and it's like, it's kind of another year where it's like if you're doing a bracket for your office pool, you're going to pick the Big Ten not to go to the Final Four.
Yeah, unfortunately, that has been a pretty safe bet, which stinks.
I struggle with the league is good if it has so many teams in the Sweet 16. I mean, there's only 16 teams that make it, and it's so matchup based. And when you look at it, like the SEC had Tennessee and Alabama in the top of the polls all year long, and those are two of the teams. And then they have an 8 seed that pulled off an upset, and Michigan State pulled off an upset. So until the Big Ten, and we've talked about this, their style of play has to be evaluated, I think, by the coaches, by the conference, get more athletes in. I think that's the one takeaway is how athletic some of these teams, if you go to your bracket and look, even the FAUs, besides Princeton having those smart guys out there running some backdoor cuts and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of athletes that make it to the Sweet 16. And Michigan State probably with their guards, they're the most athletic team that's poised for a tournament run. And that's, again, where we go back to Coach Woodson and the guys that he is attempting or what he has shown to try to bring in are people you win with at the tournament if you get the right mix. Sometimes you go after high-end talent and it doesn't work out. Illinois had that problem. Bob and I were talking before the show. Their guards were very high-rated, but they didn't work out. So you have more risk when you go for the high-end talent than you do the sure things that are very coachable. But the Big Ten has an athletic difference, and that just showed in the Miami game that we were exposed somewhat athletically. So I still think it's a competitive conference. The surprising conference is the Big East this year. With their, when you told me that Villanova was going to drop off the face of the earth, and you got UConn and Xavier and Creighton, and they're really doing well. Their style of basketball is interesting to see too, and that kind of goes, yes, they have some athletes I think as well, but they do play a little more modern, spread you out, shoot, and kind of basketball, and so maybe that's a style issue more than just coaches or players or teams would be what I think is the reason the Big Ten has struggled recently.
We will talk about some transfer news. We got our first meaningful transfer news of the offseason earlier today with some guys that Indiana is scheduling visits with. We will talk about that in segment 2. The last thing I want to ask you guys, obviously the big news broke today that Micah Shrewsbury is signing a 7-year contract with Notre Dame. It seemed like Penn State, wanted to match Pat Kraft, obviously there as the AD, but the pull of home was too much for Micah Shrewsbury and decided to go back to Notre Dame. Coach, I'm just curious to get your reaction to that. Are you happy that he is out of the Big Ten? Or are you going to miss, being able to watch his teams closely against Indiana a couple times a year?
Just from a professional standpoint, I'm happy for him. He's a great guy. I've mentioned several times on the show that I had the ability to sit down and talk to him at a coaching clinic, and just someone you would want your kids to play for. He's just a top-notch individual on top of his basketball knowledge. And he's been with Brad Stevens and Painter, and you just have to acknowledge whether you compete against him or not, there are people that don't wear Indiana uniforms that are really, really good at what they do, and he is just a class act all the way around. So I'm happy for him. I don't think it's necessarily good news for Indiana, even though it's out of the Big Ten. He comes into the state, and even though that Notre Dame and Chicago and that area is not necessarily an Indiana hotbed for recruits, and Coach Woodson, Coach Moats said this too, we're looking at a lot of athletes across the country because we want to bring those athletes in. If there is anyone in Indiana, we have another person to compete against now, I think. And Mike Bray was good, very respectful person as well, but Shrewsbury's from the state. He went to Hanover, has been coaching in the state of Indiana at Butler, Purdue, in South Bend, Indiana South Bend. He has a lot of connections and is very well respected in our coaching circle. So if there is a top-end talent that Indiana wants, they now have to battle Notre Dame. So while I'm wearing home field gear, supporting home field, and playing along with the tweet that you sent out about me transferring, I respect him enough that I will root for him to be successful, because you want good guys. And I don't mean to – I don't know Nate Oates very well, but the perception I get about him at Alabama is not a Micah Shrewsbury. And I joked about taking the Arkansas shirt off from home field and waving it, but I'm not a big fan of what Arkansas does in the program. My takes on Fran McCaffrey. I think sometimes it's X's and O's, and sometimes it's how you handle yourself as the leader of a men's or women's basketball program. Micah Shrewsbury is a great dude. And we're not playing in the Classic anymore, and I don't think Notre Dame will be on our schedule, so that doesn't necessarily directly compete. But I don't know that it's really good for Indiana to have him back in Indiana if there are athletes we share in the desire to get.
Yeah. Coach, we know where your priorities lie, but we also know that you like good coaches, so we appreciate you playing along with the joke. But at least now Micah Shrewsbury is out of the Big Ten for that purpose.
In my contract with you, Jared, it says you have to be the ass of assembly call. And so I just play along with that role, and I thought, I'd put the shirt on. So, yeah, no, he is one of my many favorite coaches besides our coaches. I wish him well.
Absolutely. All right, coming up here on Assembly Call Radio, let's talk about the offseason. We know it's pivotal. What are some realistic expectations for what Indiana can achieve? Who are some of the early names to pay attention to? We'll talk about it next. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Well, hello to everybody who is here live. This is a pretty big live showing for an off-season episode with no games. So nice to see you all. I saw someone who said, if this goes as dark, negative, and looks to take a giant crap all over the program, I'm out. I think you just have to listen to the beginning. We're okay. We are not. We are realistic, certainly, and we all have issues and questions, but I don't think there's any doom and gloom here. I did see someone else saying we can keep this happy and optimistic because Ryan's not here, which may not be a fully accurate characterization of his beliefs, but, I understand the sentiment.
Libby asks, and I won't spend a lot of time on the coaching carousel a little bit. I'm an interesting guy because I am a very forgiving person with coaches that have done things wrong. I don't necessarily put them out to pasture forever because a lot of these guys I've seen in person at clinics across the country, and you get to know them, and we all make mistakes. Not a big Patino fan. I think he'll do well at St. John's. I'm not going to root for him or get St. John's gear because of it. But it's kind of good to see that quality of coach have a chance. I don't think he was really good at Louisville. But so I think it's a good move for St. John's. Not a big fan of his overall, but you will
Coach,
find,
he's always run a clean program. Just ask him.
No, yeah, right. I know I catch some grief for the appreciation I have for Sampson's X's and O's, not for his phone call ability. I know a lot of us can't forgive that, and I get it. But I'm interested. While I hold high standards, and I don't like Fran McCaffrey and Greg Gard and some of those, I do sometimes after the what is it, the 5-year penalty or show cause. I'm kind of like a show cause guy. I put them on pause for a while, and then if they've repented and started doing things a lot better, I tend to forgive some of these coaches because I just really appreciate their knowledge and know that I've made mistakes that not to that level, but so yeah, there's a lot of good coaches on the move right now. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's hop into segment 2 here, gentlemen. Here we go.
Hey, this is Max Bielfeldt, Big Ten champ and Better Than Advertised Sixth Man of the Year in 2016. And speaking of Better Than Advertised, join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
Now there's a successful transfer story right there. Great Max Bielfeldt. Thank you, Max. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris. I'm here with Coach Sony and Coach Bob Moats. And we are going to be kind of doing an off-season primer here in this segment. Before we get to that, though, we want to talk about one of our other sponsors. As our main segment tonight is brought to you by a sponsor that was new to us this season. Not really new anymore since the season's over, but that is True Blood Real Estate. Jim Trueblood, longtime friend of mine, the founder and owner of True Blood Real Estate. And he's been helping people in Indiana buy and sell properties since 2006. And starting this season, True Blood Real Estate actually became the exclusive and official real estate partner of IU Athletics. Not sure if Anthony Leal is going to fight them for that title, but they've got it right now. And they have a team of talented agents to serve you in Bloomington and throughout Indiana. So if you are looking to buy or sell real estate in Indiana, you need to experience the True Blood advantage. Go to truebloodre.com to learn more. That's truebloodre.com, and tell them the Assembly Call sent you. All right. So, guys, let's talk about the transfer portal, because we know that Indiana is going to have to be active in the transfer portal. We know Trace is gone, although Armando Bacot coming back may have convinced some Indiana fans to open that door in their mind, but Trace has vehemently closed it several times, so I would not get worked up about that. Trace will be gone. Miller Kopp will be gone. Race Thompson will be gone because they've exhausted their eligibility. Jalen Hutchefino almost certainly will be gone because he is projected to be a top 20 pick, and so he will probably go. And while we're not going to speculate on individual names, I think it's a safe bet that there will probably be at least a couple of transfers, simply because that's the reality of college basketball. And so we have to see how that dust is going to settle. And I think it's also important to remember, think about all the guys on our roster who haven't announced their intentions yet, and now multiply that across college basketball. There's 600 and some names in the transfer portal right now. There are going to be a lot more. And so the transfer portal is really exciting. I laid out the case for why in the banner moment. I do think it's important to understand that the transfer portal is not a magic portal, right? It's not a grocery store where you just get to go pick all of your favorite ingredients and no one says anything. There's a lot of competition. And so, the teams that are going to succeed have a good strategy. They execute that strategy. And so Indiana is obviously going to need to do that. And it looks like the first pieces of that strategy we are starting to see. So we did get some Big Ten transfer news. Seth Lundy is going pro from Penn State. It seems like there's going to be a mass exodus of Penn State guys out. I mean, they had a very old team, but even the underclassmen. And Jamison Battle from Minnesota is a guy who's a grad transfer who has some Indiana interest. And a couple of other names that we have heard, and really more than heard right now. There are meetings scheduled. We don't know exactly when those are going to take place, but there are meetings scheduled with Chris Ledlam, a 6'6" wing from Harvard, and Nick Timberlake, a sharpshooter from Towson, who is a 6'4" guard. And so before we dive into those individual guys, I just want to get your guys' mindset about the transfer portal. Now that we're kind of a couple years into this, Coach Moats, like how are you viewing this and kind of watching along as we start to see some of this news come out?
Knowing that the 2023 class was not a big impact class for Indiana's recruiting, and knowing that I think when we started the season, Jalen Hood-Schifino was considered to be, I don't think people thought he was going to be a one and done. I thought maybe a two-year player, then moving on. There were questions about his shot coming in. He proved everyone that he could actually hit shots at a big level. So the portal offers a chance for IU to buy a year to get the 2024s and the 2025s in. So, my feelings on the portal are, first, you're looking at probably a preponderance of older guys, grad transfers, like the Ivy League guys who can't do the fifth. Those guys that you're bringing in, those are going to be the guys that you're going to want to really look to see, okay, can we get these guys in and kind of just get them in and have them contribute for a year and kind of go from there. The other thing is, the good news about the portal for IU is they have a post if they, that Malik Reneau can play the post if they need him to. He can be a 5 for a season if they need him to, and they can do some 5 out, move him around different places. So they can get, right now we're talking, I think there's at least 2 with a couple transfers. You're looking probably between 2 to 5 sort of people to bring on transfer. The preponderance of players in the portal are basically what you call wings, shooting guards through driving power forwards. So IU has that ability to get guys who can shoot but can create their own shot a little bit, or solid drivers with a decent jump shot. A kid like Ledlum, like we're talking about, or the Timberlake. He's a shooter, but you also know that he can get into the paint a little bit and do some work. So IU is actually looking for the people in the portal where there's the biggest, I guess, the largest reservoir of talent. If they had to go find 2 point guards, it may be a little tough. If they had to find an impact, like an absolute starter, like looking for the next Oscar Post, that's going to be a problem. But at this point, I think IU is looking at the right people. And
there's a couple of important assumptions there. One is that Xavier Johnson will be back. Mm-hmm. That seems more likely than not, but it's kind of one of those things when you talk to people, it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to get the waiver, but until we know for sure. And then, I know we got a mailbag question about Malik Reneau, and I'll just answer this right now. There has been no whispers at all that Malik Reneau is intending to transfer. So I don't mind saying that. Now, he could, like, you never know. He's a guy who lives away from home, so he does fit the profile a little bit. Jalen will be leaving. What does that relationship mean? But everybody that I've talked to thinks that it's not even worth worrying about. So take that with however many grains of salt that you want. But I think, Bob, if those 2 things happen, you know who your point guard is going to be, you know who your 4 or 5 is going to be with Malik, and his role can change based on who fills in around him. But that does give you, a solid starting point, along with Trey Galloway, who, of course, we assume to be back, and then whoever else from the current roster ends up back. So, Coach, you mentioned earlier the Illinois example. And I think the Illinois example is really instructive, as kind of a basis to set expectations for Indiana. Because if you think about what Illinois did last year, Illinois was a 4 seed that lost in the second round. Sound familiar? They lost Kofi Coburn. They lost Andre Curbelo. They lost Alfonso Plummer. They lost Trent Frazier, Grandison, DeMonte Williams. They lost a ton of production. I think this season they were 300 and something in minutes continuity from last year. So, almost an entirely new roster. Now, what did Illinois do in the offseason? They had one of the best recruiting cycles, especially in the transfer portal, of anybody. Their class was ranked number 2 by Rivals. They got 2 of the top 10 available players, as rated at evanmia.com, and Terrence Shannon from Texas Tech and Matthew Meyer from Baylor. They also got Dane Danger as well, who played a key role for them. And then they had the number 11 freshman recruiting class, headlined by Sky Clark and 3 other 4-star guys. This is why, despite all of the uncertainty, people were falling all over themselves in the offseason to anoint Illinois as Indiana's main competition in the Big Ten. It was typically one of those 2 teams, outside of like a Dylan Burkhart who decided to pick Purdue, which turned out to be a pretty smart decision by Dylan. But that's really, Coach, that's a pretty good reload, and if we're able to get in guys that are that highly regarded, I think we'll all be excited. But then you look at the results. They had some big wins early. They finished 20-13, 11-9 in the conference. They made the NCAA tournament as a 9 seed. They lost their first game, I think, to Arkansas. And so my question to you is, with so much uncertainty right now, would you take that? If I told you you could lock in right now, 2013, 11-9 in conference, make the tournament as a 9 seed. So you give up the upside of doing better, but you eliminate the downside of missing the tournament or something disastrous based on kind of your expectations. And Bob, I want to get your thoughts too. I'm curious if you would take that. And those of you listening at home, I want to get your thoughts on it too, because I think, your answer to this is pretty important in terms of the expectations I think that you have going into this offseason.
I think you would, because I think that's an important step. I think Bob said it earlier about building the program, that you don't want to take a step back to where you're bottom half of the Big Ten or whatever. And the portal is a blessing. Like, you can rebuild now because of the portal, but it's not a given that it's going to be successful either in the portal. Even taking the Illinois example, they had trouble meshing together. I would think if you ask Coach Underwood, it was a tough year because they had they had guards leave in the offseason, and then they had a guard leave in the middle of the season. They were struggling to find that ball handler. So while they had Shannon and they had Meyer and they had Danger, some guys that could really do some stuff, they had a good year, but they didn't have the year that they wanted. And I think that that's part of the danger of the portal. Part of the luxury of the portal is you don't have to automatically have a rebuilding year because you're going to bring in 6 freshmen and have to play 6 freshmen. You're going to play guys who played at Harvard or, at Charleston or whatever that want to move up, or guys like the kid from Minnesota. If Indiana's interested in that guy, the battle guy, that have played in the Big Ten and want to move for whatever reason. The nice thing about the portal, which should give fans some excitement, is Coach Woodson gets to pick the guys that he wants. So if he wants to stay with the style that he's done this year, he can go out and get a couple 5s if they're available. If he wants to spread it out a little more and play that little more 4-out, 1-in that everyone thought he was going to do and wanted wings, which is his 24 and 25 recruiting pattern, and C.J. Gunn and Banks, he can go out and get a few more of those guys. In looking at the Ledlum, I know we're going to talk specific, but Ledlum and the battle, those are guys who can shoot at the 4. And we all loved Race, and Race had to play, but Race just wasn't comfortable shooting at the 4, and we know Trace wasn't. So modern basketball is all 5 guys shoot the 3. We had 2 guys that we had to play that couldn't shoot the 3. Well, now Coach has a chance to go find some. The patience, and going back to your 2 words of optimism and patience, the patience is – we don't know. Some work out, some didn't. The Jenkins kid at Purdue, good transfer, but he ended up just playing as a role player. He didn't come in and take, a freshman, beat him out and played over him. So it is interesting to see, is there a school off the top of your guys' head that had a huge transfer portal that went into the top 15, top 20 automatically because of their transfer? Kansas State.
Texas did.
Texas and Kansas State. But then how many teams were like Illinois? And then how many teams did the mass transfer stuff and struggled? So it'd be interesting to see the numbers of how successful these major overhauls are. So we need to be prepared, and we need to set our expectations fairly while our standard stays high. Our expectations in this situation, with the patience, of giving what Coach Woodson wants to do. I'm trying to get there, and I encourage all of us to as well. But it's an opportunity to rebuild a team. As an old guy, I don't like it because I like the 4 guys coming in. I like understanding the freshmen, but I realize I'm old and times change, and you got to adapt to the changing times.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the way that people are going to answer this question really is going to kind of give a hint of what their patience level is. There are some people, and I don't necessarily think this is the wrong idea per se, but there are some people whose expectations for Indiana basketball are the same expectations that we entered the 1993 season with. Like, I don't care about excuses, and it's early. It's easier in the transfer portal now anyway. We should be able to do that. Personally, I think, given where we've been, that is the ultimate standard, of course, but I think a little bit more patience is warranted, to get us there. So, Bob, and to, also with that is, you've built this momentum for 2 seasons. what is the cost of a lost season? On your recruiting efforts for 24-25, on, a fan base that obviously still kind of feels like it's walking on thin ice with this program sometimes. So it all that kind of plays into it. So I'm curious, Bob, what your answer would be to that question.
I'd take it. First and foremost, it's a chip at a chair. And when you're talking about the NCAA tournament, especially as an 8 and a 9 seed, and we're looking at a Sweet 16 now with 2 1 seeds that are out already. So with the way college basketball's moved and has evolved, where there's more talent out there in a one-game format, somebody can go down. And if you're playing your best basketball at the end of the season, your December doesn't matter as much as where you are in February and March and wherever you've gelled together. You get a team that can do that and maybe pull off an upset against a 1 seed. That gives you an opportunity for it. More importantly, we go back to past, and I'm not really big on going back into the past and go, well, when this happened and this happened, but I would just say that, losing after 2013, the momentum that next season, and there was some off the court stuff, but some on the court stuff that really, and a really good recruiting class in 2014 that came in that really didn't pan out the way that we thought it would, as well as the 2013 recruiting class. You don't want to lose the fan base in that, because now now those questions are beginning to linger again. You start hearing it again. I'd like to just see a little bit of constancy of, okay, getting back to the tournament 3 straight years. Let's get a team that's going to be competitive, that's going to show the style of play that Mike Woodson wants. Because when he gets into those kids' homes, when he brings those kids to campus and they're going through film, at this point now, Mike Woodson's developing a resume. He's developing a portfolio, and it's like, well, I want to play this way. Well, you haven't played this way for 4 years or 2 years or whatever. No, let's get a team in there that Mike Woodson actually can show what he's done and what he wants to do with a college basketball team. And if he gets that roster in the portal, let's be bullish. And you're back potentially in 2-3 years, not just at a top 10%, not a top 5%, but maybe a top 2% program in the country.
Yeah, and look. Sally has a good point in the chat. She says, I don't want to take big steps back. And I completely agree. That's why, to me, I would take this too. And I would be disappointed at giving up the upside. I just think for this season, it is so important to keep the reality and even the perception of forward progress, or at the very minimum, just kind of treading water to get to some of the bigger recruiting classes that you've kind of planted some seeds for in 24 and 25. And just given how much of a crapshoot the portal can be, I just think the downside risk is too much. And, 2013, 11 and 9 and 9 seed, I mean, that seems like a huge difference from a 4 seed, but Indiana and Illinois seasons weren't really that different this season. So, I'm open to arguments to the contrary, but I'm with you guys, and I know that makes us a little bit more conservative. But, I think the other thing, Coach, is we spent a lot of time this offseason breaking down the offense. And, we kind of opened the season talking about how Indiana needs to shoot more threes. They're just, they're playing from behind in the basketball game math problem every game. I end the season still believing that, but I think we came around to the fact that with X gone, Woody had to make the best of Trace and had to make the best of Jalen. And he did put those guys in a position to play to their strengths. Now, are there things around the edges that could have been done to make it better? I think so, but the offense still was top 30 after being in the 90s last year. And so there was progress there, and I think we were all willing to be open-minded and give him the benefit of the doubt. I think next year those conversations are going to be different because we're going to see what he really wants to do. There's no more, you have Trace, so you have to play this way. Now you can kind of do what you want to a certain extent. So I think that's also going to make next season, whether it's better or not, it certainly is going to be interesting and a lot of new kind of conversation avenues to go down as we go through the season.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. There's just the question is, was the offense improved because of the strategic offense, or was it improved because you had 2 NBA players who played out of their mind at times and had high usage? Which you have to credit the coach for allowing the high usage for that. Yeah, we've talked incessantly about how things could be. You could still, use them at high rates with running different things and moving people and all of that. We're going to see for sure because he's going to have to be creative without those super studs. And X coming back, I don't know that he can score on the pull-up game like Hood Schifino could, but it'll be nice if he is back because at least someone can break people down and can be that go-to guy. But
he can at least get to the rim.
He's going to have to reinvent the wheel no matter what because you're not finding a 5 in the portal that can be as dominant as Trace Jackson Davis. And I don't think you're going to find someone in the portal that has the upside. I know he had some down games, but the upside of Jalen Hood Schifino. So the people that were coming in, you got to hope you go back to some of the better transfers you've seen, the Shannons at Illinois while we're using that. You can get some of the top transfer kids in the portal right now that you can sell them on Indiana and they don't go somewhere else. That's your hope. But he's going to have to reinvent the wheel somehow, whether it is still post heavy and ball screen heavy or it is a little more spread and gun. We'll see which way he wants to go. And then I think he almost has to be committed to it. I think he could have gone to that earlier if he wanted to. I don't buy into the fact that you have Trace Jackson Davis, you can only play one way and you just feed the post automatically on every pass down the court. I think if he wanted to do something different, he still could have had a dominant Trace Jackson Davis and done something different. He chose to do that, and it worked because of the success of those two young men. So congratulations. But I also think it's the reason we're not in the Sweet 16 is because I don't think it maximized everyone there. But he's going to have to be really good and creative offensively, and not just out of timeouts where he was excellent, not just the first series of a game or the first series of the second half where he was excellent. It's got to be inside the game. He's got to have his thumb on it a little bit more. But he's going to have to because of the roster construction, even if it's a good transfer portal year, and we'll see. And I totally agree that next year is going to really show what he can do offensively. But the good news is he shot a lot of threes with the New York Knicks. I went back and looked at his coaching record. Number 1 in 3-point shot attempts, number 7 in the year before, and his last year at Atlanta he had better shooters. And so I think the track record is when he's got the guys he wants, he's going to go and open it up a little bit more. I maybe that's wishful thinking, but I do believe that Woodson knows what he's doing. He knows basketball, and I just believe you're going to see it a little bit different next year offensively.
Bob, do you want to add anything to that before we move into some individuals?
Just a couple things. When you look at, again, I've not been on since talk about IU's offense, but I mean when they put Trace up in that at the top of the key, and they were running handoff action with him. You saw some times where the Trace Jackson Davis that we see today was not the Trace Jackson Davis that walked onto campus as a freshman in 2019. He has and take the mid range and the long range jump shooting out of the equation. Look at him, how he handles the basketball. Look how he pushed the ball up the court. Look at him away from the basket with more of a front-facing game and an attack game. He can show that to all sorts of different players and say, this is what I started. And you see what I started with a kid that wasn't NBA draftable. And if he goes late first round, here's where things have moved. And I really think that so much of this offensively is sometimes you're stuck with a team and you don't realize what happens. And a guy like XJ goes down. You're running actions that are going to go to two guys. One of them's gone. You got to replace that. And you're replacing your best person, and your best person at getting not just to the rim but to the lane. And I think that's the biggest problem with XJ was that we didn't really have more than one person who was really good at driving the ball. And even Jalen Hood-Schifino was more of a pull-up guy than he was a get to the nail, get to the lane, hit the weak side, create a help dilemma. And so they're going to need to find some guys in the portal who can do that, as well as guys that can knock down shots.
Not to mention, Xavier Johnson is one of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball, and that is a huge reason why Indiana's defense went down. Now, look, we talked from the start of the season, man, this defense doesn't seem quite as tight as it did last year, but it wasn't a 45th ranked defense. Instead of it jumping into the top 10, they played more like a 25 to 30 defense, and if you stay there with a top 30 offense, that's a Sweet 16, Elite 8 type team. But you lose X, you lose that, and so having him back will also help the defense. And, you may have to do some different things on defense without one of the best rim protectors in college basketball, Trace Jackson Davis, behind you. So as you can see, tons and tons of questions. So let's start talking about a few individuals. And I think this is fun just kind of as an exercise for what each of us value most with these players. And what I will say to anybody following along with the transfer portal is follow the names, look at them, get excited. But I think there's a couple things to understand. One, I don't even care if I see that Indiana has reached out. Like everybody reaches out. Who knows? They may be automated, for all I know. What you want to see are visits. Visits show seriousness from the coaches and the players. It's not just kicking tires. So when we got the news today that Indiana is scheduling visits with Ledlum from Harvard and Timberlake from Towson, that's big news. The other thing I would say is don't just run to the stats and make a judgment of a guy in 10 seconds. You got to watch people play, because what's happening in the transfer portal often is guys are switching levels. Now, Terrence Shannon, Matthew Meyer, you had a pretty good idea what those guys were going to do because they went from the Big 12 to the Big 10, right? You have a good idea. Ledlum's playing in the Ivy League. Timberlake plays for Towson. So him being able to shoot 41% from three, is he going to be able to get the same looks? What is his defense like? So I'm just saying that as a blanket statement. Don't judge a guy from the stats and think that that's the be-all, end-all. That said, I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on these three guys, Coach. So you've got Jamison Battle, who a lot of Indiana fans are familiar with. His stats really dropped this season. I think part of that is he didn't have as good a point guard as he had the year before. He was battling injuries, and Minnesota was a disaster. And they had some problems integrating him with Dawson Garcia, it seemed like. So personally, I look at Battle a little bit more for his junior stats than what he put up last season. He's a 6'7", 6'8" guy. He's a tough shot maker. He can hit open threes, and I think he would really benefit from playing with a guard like Xavier Johnson. Chris Ledlum, and again, I encourage you all, look these guys up on Twitter because there's scouting video on all of them, and I'll try to remember to post it in the community. Ledlum is a grad transfer from Harvard, which is also an important thing to remember is, what are you doing with your scholarships? Because if you bring in a Miller Kopp type transfer who's here for 2 years, that's a scholarship you don't have for 2024 where you have a lot of irons in the fire for top players. So you have to manage that too. Ledlum is a grad transfer from Harvard. Everybody looks at him and sees 30% on 126 threes and 64.8% from the line, and they're like, I'm out. I would watch Ledlum play. He's 6'6", he's big and built. He was their main guy. He had a 30.9% usage rate and an offensive rating of 104. That's good. His defensive rebounding percentage is 22.3%. That's good. He's a lot like Race Thompson, but with better driving ability, and he can really get to the basket. So you can play him with Malik Renew. I don't think saying, well, this is just like having Trace and Malik, I don't think that actually matches with him. And he helps you replace some of the disruptive defense you lose with Race Thompson because he has a really good block percentage and a good steal percentage. He draws fouls. He actually does a lot of things you want. Now, he's not a great athlete, but I think he can add a dimension for Indiana as another guy who can get to the basket and score, which Indiana really didn't have. The other guy is Nick Timberlake. He's a 6'4" guard from Towson. Good athlete. Like, you watch his tape and he's, getting dunks. He's also a grad transfer, shot 41.6% from three on 221 attempts. And that's the thing with three-point shooting, Coach, is you have to have guys that are comfortable being high-volume three-point shooters. Miller Kopp didn't really seem like that guy. Trey Galloway, not really that guy. This guy would be comfortable chucking up 10 threes a game, like a Funk from Penn State. Like, he'll shoot. He had a 114.8 offensive rating on 23.2% usage, which is really good. But what is the step up? What does that mean for him? So I'll give you my answer later, but Coach Tonsoni first and then Coach Moats, I'm curious how you would rank those guys based on what you want to see from this team next season, since they're the three guys that we know there's mutual interest in.
Yeah, one, I'd also say try to watch full game tapes or a half here or there, not just the scouting highlight tapes, because you'll see every shot go in and every nice move that the kid made. Those are a good place to start, and I have watched Battle's transfer portal tape, and I have watched Ledlum's. I have not watched Timberlake's yet. So know that when I talk about these guys, and I want to go watch at least a half of a game. I'm going to find a game somewhere and watch them play off the ball. What did they do when they struggled? How do they rebound? There's a lot of things besides stats and X and O's. Are they going to be a fit? Are they going to be coachable by how Woody coaches? Are they going to fit in with the guys that are coming back? So despite just a tape, there's a lot of things that all of us won't know that the coaching staff is looking for.
And they'll only have a teeny
guys,
idea,
right?
too.
Right, because it's got to happen, and it's going to happen quickly, right?
Yeah.
In the next week or two, some of these guys are going to start making their decisions.
It's speed dating.
And
it's not recruiting.
It is, and it's just you got to take a gamble a little bit. But those are some of the things that the coaches are going to look at and try to gauge as quick as possible in these interviews, Zoom calls, in the in-home meetings, as well as what's on the tape. So what I've seen here, and by no means am I ready to say which one is my favorite. If you're looking for someone to shoot the three and stretch, I like Battle. I think he has a potential to shoot a higher percentage. He shot 36 or 37 as a junior. As you mentioned, some of the reasons why his numbers went down. When you're the main guy, you're going to take some late shot clock stuff that's going to drive your percentage down. I think he has the ability with a good pull-up game that if you are going to change the offense to more of a four-wing around one post guy and shoot more threes, he's that guy. If you're looking for a guy to play the four that can post up, that can drive and get to the rim and shoot the three, whose form is pretty good, I like Ledlam for that. I think he's got the combination of being I think he can defend the four. I don't know what Battle is like defensively, but I think the Ledlam kid is tough-nosed. Like, he can get in there and block out. He can guard the post. He can, work in the post and has some nice moves. And you brought up the great question. That is in a league. He's going to move up a league into the Big Ten. And that's where Woodson and staff really have to evaluate quickly. How does the game at Townsend for Timberlake, Harvard for Ledlam? You have some recent examples at Ohio State. Wasn't who was the kid who came – I struggled with injuries and never really had a chance to play a lot.
This season?
The last couple seasons, he came from the Ivy League, I think, a big kid.
Gosh. Seth Towns? Was it Seth Towns?
Yeah. It was supposed to really be a changer for Ohio State, but never got the opportunity due to injury. Then you had a guy, the suing guy from Cal, I believe, took him a year to get going, and then he had a really outstanding year this year. So that's the other thing you mentioned too, is these grad transfers have 1 year to come in, get the system, and play if you're going to go that route, so you save your scholarships. If you're going to get these transfers that are 2 or 3 year guys, which are nice in their own way because you get to develop them in your style over the time, but they do take scholarships over the years. And Bob, I'll tell you, give me all the shooting in the world, even if it's at Townsend, even if it's at Danville Junior College or whatever. If you can shoot, we'll give you a shot at Indiana, because I just think we need to go there. And give me Zeisloff. Give me, the O'Neal kid. Was it O'Neal? What's the kid at Ohio State that we that transfer, the shooter? We missed on him, or he decided to go to Ohio State.
Oh, McNeil. Sean McNeil.
McNeil. You wonder what he would have done this year in Indiana.
He's a high-volume shooter. That guy will take shots.
Right, high-volume shooter. So Woodson has gone after those guys. So that's another telltale sign about optimism or patience that, who did he miss on? And not that being a negative. Like, the kid could have loved Indiana and been number 2 and gone to Ohio State because it was just better for McNeil. But he went after some of these shooter types. He also went after some athletic defensive type. The guy that ended up at Texas A&M,
Dexter Dennis.
Dennis, who wasn't quite the shooter. So he's recruiting wings, as Bob said. He's recruiting shooters. He understands that. And then when he didn't have them, he went to the offense that he went today. That's my belief, at least, in where Woodson's going to go. Can he seal the deal? Can he get in the homes? Can he get these guys to choose Indiana over Kansas or over wherever? That's the thing that we're going to have to watch and hope he does. But so I would say for me right now it's the battle, just because I'm more familiar with seeing him more. But I am interested in watching more film on this Ledlam kid. I think he's got the toughness that we all would like.
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
And I would just add that Ledlam is that modern stretch 4. In I would say a couple things not to look at when you're looking at this. Be careful about 6'6". 6'6" doesn't really tell you anything. What tells you is wingspan, tells you standing vertical. It tells you, what you really need to kind of look for is when you're seeing a guy play is he playing 3 or 4 inches bigger, or is he playing a couple inches smaller? Not all 6'6" is created equally. Look at weight sometimes. So if he's 6'6", 170, 180, 190, that's a little different than 6'6", 220. And then, and that's the thing. I mean, you're talking about playing Big Ten fours. You get into the lane, you're going to take contact. You're going to take a beating. watch him as he's playing. If you're watching a kid like any one of these transfers, as you're watching them, see when they get to the lane during game footage and see how they handle it. Are they landing on 2 feet? Are they establishing contact, making contact before they get into their shot or when they get into their shot? Look at them out on the perimeter. Are they catch? Is it catch square shoot? Is it quick? Or Miller Kopp had a pretty slow setup. That was one reason why he wasn't a high volume shooter. He needed time. When they're close out, are they attacking that closeout? If you're not wanting to look at a whole lot of game footage and you have a $20 KenPom account, hop on KenPom, look at the stats, and ask yourself the question: what do we look at with a player? I would say you look at their stat line. Like you look at the Timberlake kid's stat line. You look at his overall at 40% Then you look at the next line underneath it when you click his name. It's called Tier A, Tier B, which is a kind of a generic way of looking at a Quad 1. What did he do against Quad 1, Quad 2 competition? What did he do against his conference? And at that Tier A, Tier B, even if it's a smaller sample size, is comparable to what he had at against his conference or against other players. I would say that would be a player that you're saying, okay, he has proven before that he can play at a higher level. So yeah, I like Timberlake because he can shoot. I also like Timberlake because I look at his proportionality between 3s and 2s. He's not taking just 3-point shots. He's not just a 3 and D guy. This guy takes 2-point shots. He takes hits. And I mean, if I can look at some of the game footage and kind of get some other analytics done on the kid, I'll be more interested in seeing, okay, where were those 2s taken? Was he hitting him in the lane? Was he shooting pull-up 15-footers? Was he taking the hated 20-foot jump shot, which is, and when was he shooting him in a shot clock sort of thing? I mean, is he just a fire guy, or is he a guy that kind of plays that way? What I love about, back to Ledlum real quick, what I really love about that kid, he has great change of direction. When you see him driving, he's not just a one-way straight line driver, 2 dribbles he's in there. He can break a guy down, especially thinking about a Big Ten 4 or a Big Ten power forward or a Big Ten perimeter big, whatever you call him. He will be able to take on some guys that, that we haven't had a player like that at Indiana probably since OG. And that sort of, and may not be at the same level of OG, but that sort of attacking sort of front to the basket sort of player. So there's a lot to like in who Woodson's looking at is going after. There's also a lot there's a lot that's very telling because you can definitely see that he's wanting to open up the offense. He's wanting to try to do some different things. He doesn't want to just have penetration be a pass into the post or just off that 2-man game with the roller or rim run guy. So, I mean, looking at some of the talent that we're looking at these 3 guys right now, and we take them at this moment, you end up with a guy that you could, if I had the chance to take all 3 of them right now and close the portal down for 3 weeks, I'd do it just because I think those are the 3 guys that IU needs.
Yeah.
I see Coach Tonsoni's got his assistant here, by the way.
Yeah, he does. We got a new co-host here.
My wife is gone. I'm the only one home. And I guess Yogi. It's Yogi after Yogi.
Yogi.
Okay.
It's Yogi. He needed some attention. So sorry about that.
No.
The last thing I'll say on this, I think the nice thing is, and look, it's pie in the sky. There's a lot of good teams going after these guys. I would love to get Timberlake and Ledlum or Battle. I think that would be a really nice start. And that's just these are the only names that we know, so you do want to be kind of patient and see who else, comes out there. But the other thing to pay attention when you look at this stuff is which numbers translate and which ones don't. Habit numbers tend to translate. So defensive rebounding percentage, fouls drawn and free throw rate, turnover rate can, but I think level of play can change that and role can change that. Some things that I think it's hard to put stock in is 3-point shooting. So much of that is based on your role and what the composition of the roster is. So I would look more, as Coach Tonsoni said, what does the shot look like? Now, his poor free throw shooting kind of suggests that maybe it's not going to be a lot better than 30%, but what else can he do? The other thing that really translates is block percentage and steal percentage. Again, those are defensive habits, and we're going to need another disruptive defender to replace. And then, what does it look like when he's not using 31% of possessions? I mean, that's a crazy number that he certainly won't be doing at Indiana. And so what is he like off the ball? All that stuff. And to Coach's point, man, like if you're going to use one of your precious scholarships on a guy like this, you really want to be able to do like a 2-year recruitment like you have with high school players. It can be a volatile mixture. Just throwing these guys in. They've all got expectations. They're all going to want NIL. They're all, I think guys coming from a lower level are probably a little more realistic about what their role is going to be. And that's obviously the job of the coaches. But, I think, look, Indiana may not land any of these three guys. There may be better options. I just wanted to go through the exercise of talking through them because I think it's instructive to give, you, the listener, kind of a guide for how to view this. And it's never going to be perfect, and we may get Ledlum and be all excited, and then he comes in, it's like, oh man, boy, the athleticism, it's not translating. The driving's not translating. But I think he projects to have some of the habits that you want. Jamison Battle just looked sad every time I watched Minnesota, so I feel like a change of pace would just be better for him. And Timberlake is the kind of high volume shooter we need. So there's a lot to like about all three of these guys. There are visits, so I think it's worth investing some time to watch some film. And then just pay attention to what happens. And there's going to be a lot of new names coming up. Indiana will get involved with the guys that they like, and pay attention to the types of players, because I think that will give you a really good indication of how Mike Woodson wants to play. All right. Well, coming up on Assembly Call Radio, we are going to answer questions. We got a lot of good questions from our private community members. We are going to dive into a bunch of those next. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Any other stuff to add to that, gentlemen, before we move on?
I would just add this, that you kind of hit a point for me when you start talking about older guys. You're not just talking about eligibility. You're also talking about 21, 22, 23, 24-year-old young men versus 18, 19-year-old kids. And there's a huge difference at playing. Just looking at, as we've seen kids go 4 years at Indiana, the difference is as to the maturity, the expectation is there, but also just being able to handle, a 30-plus game season with all the ups and downs, as well as understanding that, you have a role to fill, and you figured it out someplace else and has been successful. So there isn't that unrealistic expectation that you sometimes get with the younger player who's, well, I've always been the star. I mean, anybody that's playing at high major basketball, you're usually not 99 out of 100 times the best player on your team, and oftentimes the best player on the court. And you've been that way for most of your life. These guys, they haven't been, they know now how to just basically handle not being physically dominant, or just handling the fact that they're always the go-to guy. So there's something to be said for that maturity that I think is that for that older player. If you're looking at a 1-year hit, it's going to be, I think, a little easier to do it with that mature group than it would be with a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds, as Calipari and Krzyzewski found out in their times at Duke and Kentucky, or Kentucky and Duke, respectively.
Man, that is such a good point. What is the mentality of this guy? A lot of times with a younger guy, they're transferring because they're dissatisfied with their role and they want to showcase themselves at a new school. With an older guy, they probably are much more realistic, and they've played at a lower level, and they want a chance to move up and maybe be part of a better team. And so that, you better really believe in the talent and the mentality of a young guy if you're going to take him, because that is taking up a scholarship. And there are those guys out there. I'm not saying, there aren't. Like if Kobe Buffkin is like, hey, I want to come transfer and play for you for the next 3 years, come on down, but this is why coaches get paid the big bucks, and they get, they get held accountable to these decisions where they have like 10% of the information they need to make it. So it's interesting, but I do think the teams that are good at this probably have a whole lot of infrastructure that we never hear about doing work in the background. For Indiana, that's Jordan Holes and Adam Howard. And I feel pretty good with what those guys are going to be able to do and everything I've heard about them. So just some other stuff to keep in mind. All right, guys, let's hop in and answer some questions.
This is Nick Zeisloft. I never miss an open three, and I never miss an episode of The Assembly Call.
There's another successful transfer story. That was, obviously a guy who was in the program for 3 years. Did he redshirt his first year? He did, didn't he? Or did he just come right in? Maybe not. Maybe he was only there for 2 years.
Was that the time when you had to take a year off?
Oh, maybe so. Yeah, I don't think he was a grad transfer.
The pre-portal, he was actually an undergrad, so you have to take a year, and that's ancient history now.
Yeah. All right, I'm Jared Morris. Coach Don Sony's here. Coach Bob Moats is here. Guys, it's time for the mailbag. All these questions that we're answering tonight come from our private community. You can learn more at assemblycall.com/community. Such a great place if you're looking for a great group of Indiana fans to come, and enjoy, the kind of tone that we've talked about on this show, which is optimistic but patient and realistic. That's what you'll find in our community. I'm very proud of it, and I would urge you to check it out. It's assemblycall.com/community. One of the best questions we've ever gotten here from Josiah. It simply says, "How are you doing?" Appreciate that, Josiah. Coach Don Sony, how are you doing?
I'm doing just great. Life is good.
Coach Bob, how are you doing?
Wonderful. Happy, kids growing. The dog is and he are getting along great. If that's my life, I'm 10 steps ahead of the world right now, I think.
Man, Jared,
I'm doing mostly
get
wonderful.
Coach Moats on the show, it's got to be, good. We got to save him for those down moments where we lose two in a row. Coach Moats comes on the show next.
That's right.
That's right. Just a fun guy to be around, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm mostly good, but I think we're all still kind of fighting the lingering disappointment of the men and women losing. Very disappointing. Not because we're angry at the team because they didn't give us a tournament run that we were owed. I'm disappointed because, especially the women, they just it's a damn shame when your team isn't playing at its best in the tournament and when injuries sap you of that and whatever else it is. There's a lot of things that you can explain. I'm so proud of how they handled that second half and battled back, but they fell to a tough matchup just like we did, and I think the lessons that both programs need to learn are actually relatively similar, which is you better get longer and you better get more athletic in the tournament. It's a different game than just banging against Big Ten teams, and so you got to balance that. And darn it, they almost came back and won it with Yarden Garzone, doing her best Jay Edwards impression there at the end of the game. So anyway, I'm good, but I'm not fully over the losses. I wish we were playing more, especially the women, because I just haven't had as much fun watching an IU basketball team as them since probably 2012. I think that was the last time I had as much fun. And maybe that 6-week stretch in 2016. That was pretty fun too. But the women are great, and they don't have as many off-season questions. Losing Grace is going to really hurt, but they've got a lot of people back, a good recruiting class coming in, and Terry Morin has earned a lot of trust. All right,
hey,
so
Jared,
Michael said, yeah.
Just real quick, a lot of people, you got to grieve in your own way with the IU men's and women's basketball, but don't give up on sports. Like, there's some really good stories in college basketball. So if you can find your way back at some point, I see a lot of people I can't watch, and I get that, and I'm not saying you're wrong. But there's a lot of great stories. Princeton's still in there. FAU is still in there. We love an underdog story. I'm personally tied to Tyreek Key at Tennessee. He and my son shared the Indiana State experience for a while. Just an excellent young man. Is a guy off the bench for Tennessee. The reason we like Indiana basketball is because we enjoy young men and their quest for championships and our own attachment to it. But there are some great stories if you dig deep enough. So if you can find your way back to college basketball after the disappointing, go find some great stories within the sport, both women's and men's team, and then attach yourself to that young lady or that young man and root like hell for them, because these athletes really bust it for their schools, for their communities, and the athlete. And I'm just biased as a coach in high school, and the study habits and the time. It's beneficial for athletes of baseball, football, and everything. So appreciate the sports. Once you get past your own level of struggle, find something to attach yourself to. It's still a great sport and great to follow.
Absolutely. No, that's very well said, Coach. All right, so Michael asked us this question. Most likely players to transfer out and players we want to transfer in. We just talked about the players that we want to transfer in, and I think some of the types of players that we are looking for. We've had a long-standing policy on this show to not speculate about individual transfers. I see no reason to change that, even though transfers happen more likely. I would just give you the same general guide that I always give. If you're trying to figure out who's more likely to transfer, look for guys that are farther away from home and that maybe had a small role and might want to find an increased role. And I think, you can all kind of look at our roster, see who those guys may be, but don't assume, just because a guy profiles like that doesn't mean they're going to transfer. And just because there have been no whispers or a guy doesn't profile like it, he could transfer. It's just that time of year. So I honestly just think it's not like being afraid of doing it. I honestly just think it's pointless. And it's not our job to give somebody else's news away. It's the player's job to announce it when they want to. So that's kind of how we handle those. And I don't think there aren't really any other names yet, but as this offseason goes forward, there will obviously be more names that come through. All right. Let's go here. So this question is from Chandler, and I think it's an interesting one. General question about Big Ten officiating for both the men and women's team. Do the Big Ten officials do us a disservice by calling so many fouls during conference play in the tournament? It almost seems like our players and fans are conditioned to get fouls called, and when we don't during the NCAA tournament, we're surprised, frustrated. What are your thoughts? And I find this interesting because you'll find some people who think games in the Big Ten aren't called tightly enough, and some people who think that they're called too tight. I think the big issue a lot of Indiana fans had this year is why aren't you calling fouls to enforce freedom of movement and let a great player like Trace Jackson Davis be able to move down low? And so it's not always, I think, as clear cut for what the problems are. Certainly the inconsistency, especially on the women's side, is really frustrating. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into that, but Bob, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that kind of general topic with officiating.
It's not just the number of fouls called; it's what's being called. You get a lot of small touch fouls that seem to get called in the Big Ten that somewhat, that somewhat kind of don't seem to make sense defensively. So the second part of this was also offensive fouls. There are plenty of times where I see in the Big Ten where guys just like slide under and they're moving into position that don't get called in the other power conferences. But in the Big Ten, they're called as offensive fouls, or situations where a guy kind of dips his shoulder in, kind of initiates some contact, and then they're pump and going in, and they get called offensively. There's many times I feel like teams like Wisconsin, Purdue, they're built for that type of officiating. It goes back to that whole, are you trying to win the Big Ten or compete in March sort of mindset. And I'm thinking more and more that if the Big Ten would just get in line with what the rest of the country's calling and doing it in that way, let's play basketball. Let's not try to gamesmanship our way through these. I think that's one of the biggest problems that the Big Ten has. It's not just the number of fouls, but it's what's being called, how it's being called, how the games are being officiated, and sometimes, and especially I think, sometimes in the women's game, you don't know. It's almost like a roulette wheel. They toss the ball on. Okay, what are we playing today, guys? How are we going to call this? And they even change it quarter by quarter, half by half.
Officiating in the women's game is atrocious. I feel bad. There's so many games you walk away. It's like the Miami game. That game, it was so inconsistent. And I think the way that it was called ultimately favored Miami, and to their credit, they did a better job with it. But it's like my wife and I are watching. It's like, what's a foul in this game? And certainly what's a travel, because they were going to call that at the end. So that's when it gets bad. Coach, curious if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, as a coach, you always struggle with officiating, and you work the officials and all of that. I'm at a different place than a lot of people. I can't speak for the women's game. Again, I put most of my attention into the men. I root for the women, but I don't watch it as closely. While there are some officials I think showboat a little bit and try too hard, I look at general patterns of officiating instead of officials, and I think it's just we live in a society where when the calls don't go for TJD, the officiating's bad, and we don't realize then when the calls go our way, you're not going to compliment officials. And for me, I just think that's every fan forever has just blamed officials for losses and that. And these are some of the best in the business, or they wouldn't be in the Big Ten. They're some of the best in the business, or they wouldn't make Final Fours. And some of the guys we hate the most in the Big Ten end up going to the Final Four. I don't think people are putting the worst ones there just because they like them or they have a name. I think they're there because they do a good job. And And the thing is, every coach makes 4 or 5 mistakes during a game, and every player makes 4 or 5 mistakes during a game. And we think someone's awful if they make 2 or 3 mistakes or don't see something. And with high-definition replays now slowing everything down and zooming in, the calls get magnified. But with that being said, the review process needs to be changed, the timing of that. The block charge needs to be, I think, overall, even good officials take the charge more than the block. I think that rule needs to be evaluated. And I do have some problem with in the first half, everything's loose and they get beat up on both sides, both teams, and then all of a sudden they try to tighten it up at half. But I know, one of our listeners is an official, and we've got several who have been officials in the past. The state of Indiana is struggling to find officials for its contest because of the way people react to officiating. And I never thought I'd be on air validating officials. Never thought I would. But I have friends, and we can't get people. We have to cancel games for our young people because people are not officiating games anymore because of their reactions to officials. And so you have the right to criticize officials. They do impact games, and sometimes it's not right, but a lot of times we don't see it through our colored glasses of the team that we're rooting for. The one guy, the Kentucky fans tried to ruin his business with Yelp reviews.
That's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous to get to the point of vitriol that we have with the officiating. But there are some things that I think are how you can just be real physical in the post and not have a call, and a hand touch on the perimeter. Those are things in general that even good officials are inconsistent with. Those are the things I would encourage us to point out and we can be critical of. But, these guys are good at what they do. Very, very good at what they do. It just seems in a heighted game with 1 possession or 2 possessions, we find that and I think I'm going to burn this tape afterwards because I probably need a shower now and feel real dirty that I'm supporting basketball officials. I just think, Jared, it's gotten out of hand with the social media and the criticisms of officiating. It's just a simple way to go when your team doesn't necessarily play well. But so that's just a different spin on officiating.
No, it's a great point. It is a really good point. All right, let's move on now here. Coach Sony, this is from Phil. His question is, it's a 2-part question. Number 1, what is the meaning of life? Number 2, now that Grace, TJD, Race Miller, and Jalen Hood-Schifino are gone, or assumed gone, is the answer to question 1 still applicable?
Yes. So, all right, without going on some long educational philosophical bullcrap that I do in class all the time, the meaning of life is to enjoy it and to help others. Seriously, if you want to be successful, enjoy what you do, enjoy your hobbies, and then bring other people up along the way. If you do that, you will be full, and the meaning, your life will have great meaning, and it'll last, and your legacy will be great. I fully believe that. And yes,
even if we lose basketball games?
Even if you lose basketball games. That's the reason I'm an educator. As tough as it is now, with Facebook moms attacking you because you talk about civil rights and all that kind of stuff, and it's tough, but you can impact people. You're looking at a guy over here in Jared Morris who has impacted numerous lives with interns and offering guys like Bob and I. I mean, just look at us. We got faces for radio, and he allows us to be on the show. So there's my deep philosophical social studies rant about the meaning of life. I wouldn't have met you, Phil, if it wasn't for, sports. So we got to have some wins. We got to have some lose. But my life's a lot better because I met Phil. Not so much for Tony Stuckey. I mean, struggle with Tony in the chat. Megan, some of these people are questionable in our community, but Quang is awesome. So we ought to do a show where we evaluate the chat mob people.
I cannot accept slander for Megan Mahaffey. She's one of our first listeners. I won't even accept it as a joke. Megan is above even being made fun of. Megan is assembly call royalty.
It was all in good faith.
Megan's comment. Shady to the absolute hilt, this one. Go ahead, Bob.
The problem when you put two social studies, and I actually do something different than teaching social studies now in schools, but you bring both of us on, you're going to get the meaning of life question, because this is how you kill 10 minutes at the end of class. It's a
Absolutely.
pretty, hey, I ran out of it, so here we go. I think it's all about relationships, honestly. And sports has created some of the most powerful bonds I've had with other humans that I could ever imagine. Fandom has created incredible bonds. I mean, with you guys here, I don't think we've ever met in person. But I enjoy spending time talking sports with you, whether it's here or it's on the site or wherever we're doing it. But I think to answer the question of with these kids going, this is kind of circle of life stuff here. This is what makes college sports great. You look at a kid. I mean, I saw Trace Jackson Davis for the first time. Speaking of relationships, my first football coach was Eric Moore at Center Grove. He coached 7th grade football in Columbus, Indiana as his first job out of college. I got a chance to get his wisdom as a 12-year-old boy. And I'm standing in the end zone with him and another friend of mine, and he says, "There goes the best basketball player in the state of Indiana." It's the first time I got introduced to Trace Jackson Davis. Saw him play the first time, and he was like 15, 16 years old. Saw him play the first time, just saw a kid that could, he had a great quick move. He could drop step left, dunk, drop step, get a layup. And I've watched this young man grow year after year after year for 6 years through the high school game, through the college game. And now you're going to get a chance to see him pursue his dream. That's awesome. You look at a young lady like Grace Berger, who has, just really grown as a player, but also built a program really from the bottom up. I remember when we were in school at IU, I mean, the women's program was there, but I don't think anybody really ever paid attention. It had 500 people showing up to the games, parents and a few students who just wanted to go see Assembly Hall. I mean, it's changed incredibly since the time that these young ladies have gone on the floor and played. A kid like Race Thompson, Miller Kopp, you look at his social media stuff and you see, man, the kid's funny. I've had a chance to kind of talk to him a couple times, just out and about, and just a great kid. And it's one of the great things about being in Indiana, because it's Mayberry with Interstate, so you get to know everybody, and you get to kind of get a chance to get personally connected, at least in some small way, to this. And you're just appreciative of what they brought to the program, and you get the appreciative of the chance to see these kids and these people basically go from late, being teenagers to adults. It's awesome. I love it.
It is, man. Great answers by you two. That was awesome. By the way, Coach, Libby's making fun of Megan in the chat, so I guess if her own mom is going to make fun of her, then I suppose you can. And I don't know if you noticed, but Yogi was crawling up behind you, ready to get you, and Tony's comment was "bite him." So Tony's mad.
Man, for all the years I've had this cat, it's the first time it's ever done this.
Oh, that's funny. All right, let's hit a couple of these rapid fire here. Alex says, have we heard anything about how likely it is that Xavier Johnson will be granted a medical red shirt? And Ken asked what the timetable is. Everybody says it's, I would give it 2 or 3 weeks before you get concerned. It seems like it's going to take a little bit of time. I think it has to go to the Big Ten, and then there's an appeals process to the NCAA. I think it's something like that. But from what I was told, it could take 2, 3, 4 weeks. So it's obviously very important. Look for news, but I wouldn't start panicking if you don't hear anything for a couple weeks. Let's see here. I wanted to hit this question from Phil. He says, I have seen commentary that NIL is the first thing recruits want to discuss from high school or the portal. One expert went so far as to say coaches without an NIL war chest will not be successful getting the right recruits. Do you believe this is true? How do we find out the status of NIL? Will the billionaire donors wind up overwhelming the collectives? I think it's, Adam Finkelstein had a good thread on this. It is definitely important, and it is definitely a thing. But it's basically table stakes. And what I mean by that is I don't think a lot of guys are making their final decision based on NIL, but to have a seat at the table, you need a minimum level of NIL. So that's kind of the way that I would look at it. And, from all reports, I know I saw a lot of people were asking Eric Pankowski from Hoosier Hysterics about this, and obviously they have the Hoosier Hysterics NIL Collective, one of 3 that Indiana has with Hoosiers for Good and Hoosiers Connect. And his general ranking of where we are was top 15-ish in the country. Now, there's no data behind that, but he would know probably as well as most people. So I would, that's as good of a guess as I can give you. But it certainly seems like Indiana has enough and a good enough infrastructure to have a seat at the table. Doesn't mean it'll always be that way, but that's what it looks like now. And so it may be the first thing they want to discuss, but it often isn't the last thing they want to discuss. And you still have to sell people on basketball and the school and the relationships and all of that stuff. But it is basically table stakes for certain guys who know that they're at a certain level. So that's what I would say about that one. And then coaches, I'll give you this one. This is from Lisa. She says, I can't recall specifically which member of the assembly call team said this. I think it was Ryan. But it was said that Purdue builds teams to win Big Ten tournaments while Michigan State builds teams to win national championships. What is it about both teams that makes this generally the case? She asked for the person who said this to answer, but I think we can all step in and answer this one. Bob, why don't you take the first stab at it?
First stab is Purdue. Looking at Purdue's roster and look at every player that gets floor time on them and ask yourself, do they do multiple things well or one thing well? 1 or 2 things well? That's where Purdue is different than a Michigan State. And again, going back to why you should watch tournament games, IU and Philly, who's another great poster, old friend of mine from my days at IU, he'll tell you, you don't just watch your team, you watch other teams, and when you watch those tournaments, just bite the bullet and watch teams that are in there. Look what Alabama's doing. Look what Texas is doing. Look at how those teams look and ask, are we like them or are we completely in the other direction? And I think that that's where Purdue is. They're completely in the other direction. They're very system-based. They're very set dominant. And you start getting in the tournament, you start getting against better teams, your actions aren't just going to get you shots. The 2 cuts in the screen aren't going to get you what you may be getting against other opponents. You got to have guys that can create their own. You have to have guys that can actually, run counters to what defenses are throwing at them. That ability of athleticism, that ability to just just make plays. And I think that's where Michigan State has the advantage over many teams in the Big Ten. And I think that's where Mike Woodson wants to go. I think it's where Micah Shrewsbury wanted to go. I think it's where Chris Holtman wants to go. I think it's where Juwan Howard wants to go. But I really think, what I like about where IU is, we're seeing better results, I think, early. But I think that you look at Purdue versus Michigan State, I mean, it's night and day. And the big thing is Purdue, they get guys that can do one thing at an elite level, and Matt Painter is a great coach. He gets those guys to do the other things at a level that's acceptable.
That is really well said. Yeah,
it's a tough decision. You have programs in the Big Ten that can they recruit on a national athletic basis? And if they try and come up short, what's their regular season going to look like? Or do you recruit to a system, the Wisconsins, the Purdues, to some extent Iowa? Do you, a Northwestern has to be in that category as well. Do you want to be in contention for a Big Ten championship and maximize and have 31 great experiences? Or do you want to roll the dice in the recruiting game, the portal game, of having maybe, can you get those guys? Indiana's more set. You brought it up with the Kansas State comparison early. Indiana has that, whether we haven't been real relevant for 20-some years, so I know some people nationally say we don't, but Indiana still has that brand name that we can get there. Michigan State has worked hard to get there. Michigan has that ability to recruit those types of athletes that can win in March. But, Illinois, go back. I know I catch heck for the Underwood stuff, but he ran into trouble with some guards. His guards didn't pan out. And I think some of the chemistry issues today with getting good transfer portals, I think if you honestly ask him and sit down where he's not on record or whatever on television, he's going to say that he brought in a lot of good guys, but they didn't mesh the way you needed to mesh to have a top 15 team in March, but those guys were poised to win in March if everything had worked together because of the athleticism. So you got to decide who you are and who you want to be, and then you got to go try to get there. And I think that's where Coach Woodson is. I agree. I think he understands in order to put a banner up, you have got to go and recruit a certain type of player, and I hope that he understands you got to play a certain way, and he had to take these 2 years to get there maybe. That's what I'm hoping and believing, because you can't win in March with Purdue's situation. As much as I believe in Matt Painter as a person, as a coach, I don't think you can win. You'll have your years, like Wisconsin got to the Final Four. Purdue might have had a shot with Carson Edwards when that Virginia shot went in. They might have had their shot to go. But programs like that are going to have their shot just ever so often because of the people they recruit in. But when you reflect, guys, you got to respect the guys that come in and bust their rear end and put the name of the jersey, the name on the front ahead of the name on the back, NIL or no NIL. You got to respect those programs, but a lot of times those programs don't win in March. That's a frustrating thing for me when those types of teams that played for the name on the front used to win a lot more than just your athletic one-and-done type teams. But it's a different game.
I'm curious. They brought in Miles Colvin, Roosevelt Colvin's son, Kenon Catchings, or they're bringing them in. Those are different types of players for Purdue. You haven't seen a lot of guys that play like that, so I'm kind of curious how that meshes and if that gives them some of that dynamism that they've been missing. Hopefully not, of course, but I do think it's interesting. Okay, a few more quick ones. Jim asked a great question, and I don't have a good answer to it, but I do want to look into it. He said, I looked at all 68 teams that made the NCAA tournament this season. 57 of them had at least one international player on the roster. The number's closer to 50 if you take out players from Canada. Indiana was among the 11 with no international players. It says, I know we missed on the point guard from Finland. He's going to Baylor. Are there others we're looking at? Not really that I know of. I don't know if you guys know anything different. I think like Flory Badunga, he's not from the United States, so I guess he would count in there to whatever extent we actually have a chance at him. He says, does the fact that Jordan Hull's played in Europe 8 to 9 years mean anything? I don't know. Actually, I'll ask Jordan. Maybe, because it's all about contacts and who you know and some of that stuff. So to the extent that Jordan got involved in the, maybe youth basketball or college basketball overseas, maybe so. But I don't know. So I want to give you a better answer, Jim. I just don't have the information. So we'll look into that more. And then let's see, last question here, because I think we basically covered some of this other stuff. No, 2 more. All right, Coach Sony, to you first. Kevin says, assuming Malik Renew stays, would you rather target another big post presence? And he uses the example of Graham Ike from Wyoming, who Indiana fans will remember their center from the play-in game last year. Good rebounder, decent touch around the rim, but very much a, kind of back to the basket rim protector type. Or a more versatile stretch forward like a Jamison Battle or the other guys that we've talked about. Assume either type of big man is of starter level quality and expectation. What do you think, Coach? You need someone to protect the rim.
I think we need both. I mean, there's not a situation or a player type that we really don't need with the mass exodus of players due to graduation, and I'm assuming 1 or 2 transfers. We're going to need both. I would go after a rim protector 5 who can run, transition, dunk, play the dunker spot, but maybe not be that, heavy back to the basket post usage guy again. And we do need a stretch 4. If I had to pick right now with Renew for 1 year and knowing we got recruits 24 and 25 that we're really trying to hit, I would take the stretch 4. But again, I'm biased in wanting more athletes, more shooters, more spread the floor, spray and shoot type offense. Again, it's dependent on what Coach Woodson wants to do. That's the style that I would like to see Indiana play. So give me that stretch 4 if I had to pick one or the other, because I believe Malik Renew can play and play well. He might not be quite the rim protection that TJD was, but I think he can score in the post when you need someone, and I think he can rebound. He'll have to clean up some fouling and stuff. But if you had to start him at the 5 and play him heavy minutes, I'm okay with that. I would be hesitant to bring in a 5 and play him at the 4, and you're back to that a couple of low post guys at one time, which clogs lanes and stuff. So Give me the 4 guys around. Give me a 5 that can shoot the 3. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
If I had to pick to answer the question, let's go with the stretch 4. But I think we should recruit both. To be honest, the more you need, the more athletes and the more players you have, the better chance you have of a couple meshing and getting us where we all want to be.
One follow-up on that question about Purdue from Ken. He said it still begs the question of why the Purdue system works so well in the Big Ten Conference. So you guys kind of laid out why it doesn't work in the tournament. What is it about the Big Ten then that allows them to be so consistent and not be taken advantage of?
I think the answer to that question is you look at the overall athleticism. Again, it goes back, the athleticism of the players in the conference. When I was doing my bracket, I was looking at Iowa versus, I believe it was Auburn. And I said to myself, Iowa has Murray, Auburn has a team of Murrays. I think there's your answer. And if you're asking the question, why does the Big Ten, why is there only one team in the Sweet 16? Why were you seeing so much just packing in the middle? There may be the answer more than anything else, is that the level of athleticism in the SEC, the Big 12, not so much as it was in the ACC. I'd even say the Big 12 in some respects. You're dealing with some teams that are really, really good and really, really athletic. And that, I think, is kind of where Purdue, is able to be the best for the style of play that the Big Ten has kind of culturally adopted.
Yeah.
Bob,
and
do you think
it's not
that's
just
the same?
athleticism. Oh, go ahead, Coach.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that's the same in the Big East? Like the Big East is having some success, and when I look at Xavier, I don't know if they're super athletic, but they have a lot of guards that can do with the Boom kid help them, and Jones. And then I think Connecticut has that. Creighton is just a unique school in the way they play. And then Marquette had guards too, the Kolick kid and some athletes, and Jones on the stretch. Do you think the Big East is as athletic as those other conferences that you mentioned?
The thing with the Big East is the diversity in the talent pool is just so vast. With the Big Ten, anybody can beat anybody any given night. That's kind of true in the Big East, but it's not so much the case. But I think you're exactly right that it's a different type of game. It's, I think, more of a spread game. You look at a kid like Nunji at Xavier, who was at Iowa. He's a 5 that can hit the 3. He's a 5 that can, he can do multiple things. And I think that's the other thing, is that skill versatility is essential. You got to have guys that can do multiple things. And I don't think the Big Ten, you don't have as many players in the Big Ten that have that skill, I guess, that skill diversity, that skill variance, the variety of skills available to score the ball that you see in other conferences. And I think that's the issue.
And I think it's important to note it's not just athleticism, it's functional athleticism.
Exactly.
Jordan Geronimo is a great athlete. Mm-hmm. Caleb Banks is a great athlete. CJ Gunn is a great athlete. CJ Gunn and Caleb Banks much earlier on their development curve, and so their athleticism very well should turn into functional athleticism, and Jordan's just hasn't to this point. Maybe it will in the future, but it hasn't. And a lot of times you see the guys with the highest functional athleticism on a basketball court, those are your McDonald's All-Americans, and the Big Ten just is not pulling those guys in. And it does end up mattering, when you get into the tournament. So that's a really good answer, guys. All right, last question from Kyle. Is it even worth recruiting a high school player if they are not a 5-star instant impact player? It seems like if guys don't play as freshmen, they instantly hit the transfer portal. With that mindset, is it best to only target 5 stars and then focus the rest of your recruiting efforts on the transfer portal? Bob,
Yes.
you want to hit that off?
Yes,
I think for Indiana, definitely. I'll take that real quick. It drives me nuts because I think there's a lot of good college kids that deserve a chance to play at different levels of basketball. But I do know it has changed recruiting in every sport because you can go get someone who's had 2 years of college development, whether they've played or not played, and bring them into your system. I had a niece who's a Division I volleyball player who had a hard time getting recruited. She was a setter, and there's only so many setters. And then you had the COVID year, and you had the idea that you can take in a transfer portal player from a bigger school, smaller school, whatever you wanted, and she was somewhat stunted in her recruiting. She ended up finding a place at Indiana State. So I know that personally. But, yeah, I think you're going to have to identify those players that can come in and play like the Hood Shafinos and the Malik Renews and try to focus on them if you want to win in the tournament. The Purdue's are going to take their chances on the Lawyers and the Braden Smiths, but those Lawyers and Braden Smiths are going to not be as recruited as much anymore, I think, because of the ability to make quick changes in the transfer portal. I just think that's the evolution of the game. Good
and I
or
would
bad.
and I would add to that you have to. It's kind of like the old question, like when free agency hit baseball. George Steinbrenner tries to build the Yankees every year using free agents. Blew up the 80s. Once he rebuilt his farm system in the 90s, he started winning World Series again. It's the same equation in basketball here, that you should be building with your farm system and filling in with the portal. This year for Indiana is going to be unique because we have a large number of kids moving out, and we didn't fill with 2023s. We didn't get that, Cheney class, or we didn't get that movement type class that we've seen in the past. We have 2 guys coming in, 2 really good guards, and they're going to develop into excellent college basketball players. I don't necessarily buy the idea, especially when you think about team culture, when you start thinking about coaching, when you start thinking about even NIL throws into this as well. That if you have a solid NIL program and you're Anthony Leal did this program an incredible favor when he goes on the Twitter and he basically shows himself paying for his sisters finishing their college education with his NIL money. And that's, from a marketability standpoint, the 13th guy just paid for his sister's college education. Even if I'm not playing there, I can do good for my family. If I'm a kid who's wanting to do good for, wanting to help people, wanting to buy my mom something nice, wanting to buy my dad, help my family out in some way, shape, or form, that's a very powerful message that's being sent there. And that's a kind of a two-way street. I just add the final part of this, which is, culture is essential, because I saw a team this year that had a great time. I loved reading Chris Gunn's tweets, watching the parents having a good time, watching these guys going out game after game after game, supporting their kids. There's a culture, there's a family vibe that you're beginning to find in this program that you don't really see in other places, or it's not as apparent in other places. Maybe I'm not watching it close enough, but honestly, I can tell you, it's not nearly as feeling as cutthroat. There's a connectivity there. And I think that's something that an 18, 19-year-old may not always see it when they're first year there, but as they start listening to others and start kind of looking at what's happening, they're gonna jump in and be less likely to transfer out of a program where they see a pathway and they have relationships that are being built that are strong.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's going to require a balance. A program like Indiana can compete for 5 stars. And you need to go for those high-level talents. And you clearly need to go to the transfer portal to fill in your gaps. But you've also got to have your keepers of culture. If it's a constant revolving door all the time, what's the foundation? Trey Galloway helps you build a foundation. Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton profile as guys who build a foundation. CJ Gunn, Caleb Banks. Now, you can't have a roster full of all those guys, but I think you need some of them because – and who knows? Arkansas, that seems like they bring in like a new roster every season. And so maybe the keeper of the culture is the coach and you can fill in around it. But I don't know. I'd like to win like Arkansas, but I don't know that that's the type of program that I want to have. So it's interesting. My favorite thing is following a guy like Trace and Race and seeing them develop over time. And so I don't want to lose that, but I want to win. And so I think there's got to be some kind of happy medium there. That's a bit like a Kansas. Jalen Wilson, DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams. I don't think they were big recruits, but those guys have kind of formed the backbone of this latest Kansas run. And then you sprinkle in McCullough and you sprinkle in Grady Dick. And so I think there's got to be some kind of balance there. But where that is can kind of be a moving target every season based on what you need, who's available, all that stuff. But ultimately, that's up to the coach, to figure that stuff out.
One last thing I want to say on this topic is the COVID, that extra COVID year impact is going away in the next 2 seasons.
Yeah. Right.
We don't know what the day after looks like. We just don't. I think we're seeing a lot of kids that are going to be. Will water find its level? I'm not really sure, but I think at this point there's going to be a thing where the pool of players available is going to shrink once again back to a more manageable number.
Yeah, it's a really good point. All righty. Well, that is going to do it for us on this week's edition of Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com, normally on Thursday nights throughout the offseason, for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thank you to Bob Thompson for producing our music. Thank you to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. Thank you to Bob Moats for joining us tonight. And thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then.
Take it from me, Rob Hennessy. Keep your eyes on the rim, your elbows in. Go Hoosiers.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Here I come, Mrs. Stun Sony.
Nice job, gentlemen. Bob, thanks for all the insight, man. That was great.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. I love doing this. And again, any chance I get to talk almost 2 hours about basketball with people, who know what they're talking about, I'm there. I'm there.
Careful.
Yeah, I told Bob we're gonna wrap soon, because usually by this point Ryan's like in the chat talking about how he needs cereal, or like he's got to go to dinner or something, and Bob is like, hey, I could do this all night. So we appreciate
I tried to
that,
stand
Bob.
up. I tried to stand up and eat dinner tonight just so I could feel the pain that Ryan goes through.
It's harsh, man. It's harsh.
It's tough. I can feel his pain now.
I really appreciate this conversation, because it's really easy to just kind of come on and rant and rave and do all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think too often people mistake the extreme opinion for like the real talk, or wow, that person's really holding them to high standards, which I think is complete BS. I'm glad we were able to have a nice, there's risks, there's question marks, there's a lot of things that we don't know. But I don't think that the unknown doesn't have to lead to the negativity. Let's let it play out. Let's talk through the basketball issues in a real in-depth way. And so I appreciate, Bob, you helping us do that tonight. That's what I wanted to accomplish, and I feel like we did.
Well, I'm glad I could be here and help and just kind of throw that out. I was kind of thinking about this as we were going through this. Like, you look at the top three teams that we thought were going to be in the Big Ten. It's going to be Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio State.
Yeah.
Of those three programs, we should be the happiest. I mean, Ohio. Yeah. I mean, bar none. I mean, yeah, okay. So Purdue, and honestly, Purdue, was it a fluke? Yeah. Their quick ascension in the top 25 because everybody else was a stinking pile of average. They got to the top of that pile faster than everybody, and they stayed there because nobody beat them until Rutgers. And by this point, everybody's clubbing on everybody else. So they were able to kind of linger in there, and then they get this 1 seed, and they found the 1-16 seed that was matched up, a team that shouldn't have even been in the tournament.
Man.
And I feel bad for the players. I feel bad for Sam. I feel bad for Matt from Columbus. I mean, they're both walk-ons at Purdue. They were having the time of their lives. It was a blast for them. I feel bad for all those kids. I feel bad for Matt Painter. I feel bad for Matt Painter's wife, who's going out in public right now. But it's like if you're yelling about firing Matt Painter right now, are you nuts? We can tell you what this looks like. We can tell you what it looks like to go through every 5 years. Hey, let's do this again. Let's get the coaching hot board up and see which guy we want. No, we don't want to be those people. You don't want to be those
Bob,
people.
The folks in the chat are wondering if this talk about Purdue's demise is leading you to be opening and closing your zipper a lot. I think those are some of the...
Sorry about that. I don't know what I'm doing here, and my apologies if you're getting this weird feedback.
We're gonna get Bob a mic.
It's happening.
Man, it is crazy though. Like in Dallas radio, and people number one, people in Dallas don't care about college basketball. They certainly don't care about Big Ten basketball. 2 segments already on the radio station that I listened to, The Ticket, that have broken down the Purdue upset and talked about it in negative terms and talking about how it's the biggest upset of all time. I mean, it's look, it pleased me to no end to watch it, but being on the other side of that kind of stuff with my dad who coached, and genuinely turn the mic off, but genuinely liking the Purdue players and coaches. They're good. There's nothing unlikable about them, even if you don't like their style. I really do feel bad that they had a good season and it's going to go down like that. I mean, it still makes me laugh, and I bought a Fairleigh Dickinson shirt. So like it's a wide range of emotions, but it's like, our buddy Greg from the Prags in the Stands post-game show. I empathized with him having to come on and talk about that loss. And he did such a good job. I thought it was a great post-game show intro, but just as people, outside of the punchlines and the rivalry as people, I mean, it's awesome, but it sucks. I just it's a weird thing to kind of try to process from the outside. But anyway, that's all I'll say about that. Coach lives up there still, so
Oh, jeez. It was funny because everyone just kind of flocked to me with their excuses and their conversation before I could even get a word in, and I was just going to go in and be nice. I mean, we got beat on Sunday, so but it was fun.
It was fun.
I am going to wear my FDU shirt to school though at some point.
Yeah, as you should.
You should.
Yeah, right?
As you should.
Well, it's the gift that just keeps giving.
It does.
Because of all the crap that I get up here, like that'll never go away. I can just say stop, FDU.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And we swept you that season.
Yeah, 2-0 against
you. You
us.
lost to FTU.
And you lost to FTU. Conversation's over. You tell me one more time I have a stain on my shirt, I'm going to go FTU.
FDU.
Like, it's FTU. Do they teach that at West Lafayette? Like, is that part of your graduation or your entrance exam? Like, you've got to point out to every IU fan something wrong with their shirt or their hat. Like, I've heard that if I had $1, I would, we would have more than mics. We'd have a studio, in-house studio for everyone. For $1 for every time I've heard that up here. Drives me crazy.
I remember all the crap I took when I was up there. I'm leaning back toward more that this is hilarious. My empathy is fading now, as you remind me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stupidly, in my 20s, I went to a Purdue game in an IU sweatshirt rooting for Purdue. I mean, it was like Purdue, and I was just, I'm just here to support Indiana, and I get a Coke thrown in the back, it hits me in the back of the head. It's like, jeez. What's wrong with you people? I mean, I'm actually cheering for Drew Brees. Why are you feeling like I need to hit me upside the head or something? It's like, and it's just, but no, I mean, it's great having rivalries. Rivalries are fun, but that was just,
especially when they lose as a 1 seed.
Exactly. I
do think it's important, Coach, you were talking about, the secret to life, right? And I think, rivalries with a team like Purdue are interesting because you guys see me on Twitter. Like, I love riling them up and getting into that stuff. I think it's really funny. But like underneath it all, as you can tell, like I don't really harbor true animosity to them. And I think it's, to a certain extent, I feel like it's kind of good for the soul to be able to balance that humor and find the laughter in it when it's just like these 2D images on a screen, but then to remember the real people behind it. Do they deserve to take all the grief they're going to take for the rest of their lives? I kind of don't think so, I mean, the fans do. There's some annoying fans that I'll give grief to forever. But the players and coaches, it doesn't seem like an equitable penance for them to pay for one bad 40 minutes. And they're going to be talking about that for the rest of their lives. So that part of it to me is still funny. As you can tell, I'm conflicted about it. But, it's good to empathize with your fellow humans, even if they live in West Lafayette. Because they're still humans, barely, but still humans. So,
barely.
Anyway.
Barely.
Yeah. Jeff Marlowe, don't feel any sympathy for any of them. Okay.
I would, but my in-laws got their graduate degrees from Purdue, so I'm having that moment of like, wait.
Oh gosh. All right, let's close this up. Well done, gentlemen. Always a pleasure having you on, Bob. Always a pleasure, Coach, having you and Yogi here. We appreciate it, and go enjoy the games this weekend, even though Indiana's not in it. Let's go watch some good basketball.
All right.
See y'all.
All right, everybody.
Goodbye.
Peace.
Peace. Have a good night.